All right. Good evening, everyone. We'll just hang tight for a second, just give everybody an opportunity to log in just before we get started. All right, so I think we'll get started just with introductions and whatnot. The number of attendees is kind of plateaued at 19. So I'm sure a few others will join us in a few minutes or so, but we'll get started. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's neighborhood meeting. My name is Andrew Gamero, and I'm a planner with the City of Barrie's Development Services Department. The focus of tonight's meeting will be on a potential development application for proposed zoning bylaw amendment at 505, 511, 515, and 533 Yonge Street. Please be aware we are recording this meeting for the public record. All information provided is being collected and will be used for the purpose of garnering your input, to respond to inquiries, and to be notified of future meetings, and will be considered public information. Should you have any questions regarding the collection of this information, please feel free to contact the Development Services Department after tonight's meeting. I'd also like to let everyone know that we do have staff behind the scenes this evening, just managing the technology for us. And they do have the ability to interrupt the meeting at any time, but we will endeavor to allow the applicant or the property owner's representative and each member of the public an opportunity to speak. And if we do run into any technical issues, we just ask that you please bear with us. We'll do our best to resolve those and to get the meeting back on track so we can continue as scheduled. Just before we do get into the thick of things, I just want to verbally confirm that there are 21 members of the public on the call right now. I think collectively we did have 33 register, but as of right now, we've got 21, including your local ward councillor, Mr. Jim Harris. So before we get into the applicant's presentation, there's just a few items that I wanted to discuss. Firstly, I just want to provide everyone with an overview of this meeting and the expectations for tonight. So tonight's meeting is not a statutory requirement under the Planning Act. This development proposal is still in the pre-submission stages, meaning an application has not been submitted to the city yet. So the intent of tonight's meeting is more so to provide members of the public with an opportunity to become familiar with the development proposal and the planning review process, and also to ask the applicant questions and provide feedback. So a few things you can expect at tonight's meeting are first, a presentation from the applicant's representative describing the proposal and just providing an overview of the policy that apply to the subject lands. A brief overview of the city's review process and timing, just so everyone gets a general understanding of the planning application process and what to expect after this evening's meeting. And finally, an opportunity to ask questions of either the applicant or city staff and provide comments or identify any concerns that you might have with the development proposal. What we won't be doing this evening is city staff will not be providing a recommendation on the application or a detailed policy analysis of the proposal. This will occur later in the process once a formal application is submitted and is under review. Also, we will not be debating the merits of the proposal. So please do not expect a debate on the merits of the proposal between city staff and the applicants or between the applicant and residents. This isn't the venue for that. This is more of an information session. There will be an opportunity for more dialogue through the formal application process once the statutory public meeting is scheduled before the city's planning committee, which is made up of council. So once we move on to the question and comment period, if you do wish to ask a question or provide a comment, you will be required to use the meeting controls to raise your virtual hand. You can find the raise your hand button and other meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. For those who are joining us by phone, you can press 9 to raise your virtual hand. And when you're called upon to speak, you can press 6 to unmute yourself. So when we do call individuals to speak, you will be called by name, and then you'll have to unmute yourself. And we do ask that you please clearly state your full name, followed by your property address and your questions or comments. And also, as we work through the questions and comments later in the meeting, staff respectfully request that members of the public please avoid repeating the same questions and comments over again. We do want to give everyone an opportunity to speak, and we do want to hear from everyone, absolutely. But once a specific matter has been identified, it will be documented, and the applicant will either provide a response verbally this evening or provide a response later through the formal application process during the future public meeting, or in written format through their formal submission, and they could include those responses in their planning justification report. This approach will just allow us to have a more productive meeting and conclude the meeting as scheduled at 6:30 p.m. And members of the public can also send additional comments or questions to me via email after the meeting. My contact info is available on the city's proposed developments webpage under Ward 8. But I will provide my email. It is andrew.gameiro, that's GAMEIRO @barrie.ca. So feel free to shoot me an email after tonight's meeting if you have any other questions or comments. And finally, for those that have registered for tonight's meeting by either providing your mailing address or your email, you will be added to the city's mailing list to receive further information about the development proposal. And that includes key dates, my contact information, and also the submission material once a formal application is submitted to the city. So before we get into the applicant's presentation or the property owner's presentation, I just wanted to quickly highlight the next steps in the application process, just so everyone knows what to expect after tonight's meeting. So as I mentioned, we are currently in the initial stages of the planning process. The proposal has gone through a high-level pre-consultation technical review exercise with a variety of city departments and applicable external agencies, including the Conservation Authority, with the expectation that an application may be forthcoming in the future. After tonight's meeting, the applicant will be expected to incorporate comments received at this meeting and make a presentation through the public meeting process before the city's planning committee when an application is actually submitted. And also the formal application submission would be reviewed with comments being received from the city's technical departments and external agencies, as well as consideration of the public's input. And this neighborhood meeting is really established in the early in the development process, just to ensure that local concerns are incorporated or addressed through the applicant's submission, and also taken into consideration through the technical review process once an application is submitted. So following tonight's meeting and the review of the formal application, provided one is submitted, a future public meeting would be scheduled with the city's planning committee. And just to clarify, planning committee is made up of members of council. So the public meeting is a statutory requirement under the Planning Act. And everyone who registered for tonight's meeting, as well as all property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands would be notified once an application is submitted, and they'd also be notified of the public meeting. And also the notice sign on the property would be updated to reflect that the city has received a submission. So the public meeting would also be held virtually, similar to tonight's meeting. And at the public meeting, the applicant's representative will present the application to planning committee and again answer questions. And at the public meeting, the applicant would be required to identify that a neighborhood meeting has been held and provide an overview of and a response to the issues and concerns identified at tonight's meeting. And again, members of the public will again have an opportunity to provide either verbal or written comments at that public meeting, and it does form part of the official record associated with the application. And finally, following the public meeting, planning staff and our technical review team would continue the review process associated with the application, and the applicant may make any necessary revisions to the development proposal in response to any comments that are received from staff or even comments received from council and members of the public. And once the review process has concluded, that's when a staff recommendation report would be brought forward to planning committee for their consideration. And all comments received throughout the review process, including those received this evening and at the future public meeting, would be identified and addressed in the staff report and would form part of planning staff's recommendation on the application. So that's really it in terms of the planning application process and what you can expect after tonight's meeting. If anyone has any other questions about the process, I'm happy to answer them during our Q&A session. But I'll leave it there for now. So I'll now move on to the applicant's presentation. As I mentioned, the development proposal will be presented first, followed by a question and comment period. And with us this evening, we do have James Krubnik. I apologize, James, if I mispronounced your last name. Feel free to correct me once you get into your presentation. James is with Innovative Planning Solutions, and he will be presenting the development proposal on behalf of the property owner this evening. So on that note, I'll hand the meeting controls over to Jack to share his presentation. Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah. So thank you very much, Andrew, for that introduction. My name is Jack Krubnik. I'm here on behalf of our ownership and as well as Innovative Planning Solutions. With me today is also my colleague and president of Innovative Planning Solutions, Darren Vela, as well as Kirsten Tuckey and Jerry Pilon, who is the principal at Salter Pilon Architects, who is the architect on this file. I am going to, just briefly give me a moment while I share my screen. Okay, and Andrew, I have to rely on you if that's coming through clearly.
Yeah, Jack, I can see it clearly.
Perfect, thank you very much. So after those introductions, I'll start off to give you a high-level overview of the site itself. As you can see from this diagram, there's a property consolidation here. The bulk of the site is 505 Yonge Street. It is joined alongside, consolidated with 511, 515, and 533 Yonge Street, with significant frontage on Yonge Street. This is a little bit of a diagram that is a kind of a broader view of the site and where it fits from an official plan perspective. Some of this information is taken from Schedule I of the official plan. That's an intensification area schedule. It shows that our site has frontage on Yonge Street, which is an intensification corridor, and fits between two primary nodes. One is north of our site at Little Avenue and Yonge Street, and the other one is south of our site at Big Bay Point Road, my apologies, and Yonge Street. At the very corner is the kind of Barry Go station. So that's another primary node that's identified down from our site. Very briefly here, just to give you an overview of what's existing on site here, and you can see the built form that's on those parcels that and the way the relationship between the surface parking and Yonge Street is prior to our application. And from an official plan perspective, you'll see that all these land holdings are designated residential. The dark green you see there is an environmental protection area. We don't intend to develop any of the site within that area, but the residential permits for complete communities with a mix of land uses, and to develop residential areas with densities that are transit supportive, and to also have high quality linked public spaces. And as you'll see from our site plan, we've intended to do just that. Now, this is the zoning bylaw, and my apologies if it's not coming up completely clear here. The green that you see on site is environmental protection. That's consistent with the OP designation. That's the zoning designation is also environmental protection area. That kind of dark brown you see over most of the site is RM2. That's a residential multiple dwelling second density. And the small kind of R1 sites you see there are the residential single detached dwelling first density. We intend to, with the exception of the green, rezone this site. And I'll get into that in a further slide. Now, Jerry will speak to some of this site plan as well, but before he does, I'll give you a kind of an overview of the plan here. We are proposing 426 dwelling units in 4 distinct buildings. You will see that building 1 and 3 are at 8 stories. That's the one at the very north corner and the one at the very top, sorry, north end of the site, and the one at the very bottom of the site, site number 3, building 3, apologies. Building 2 in the middle of the site along Yonge Street is proposed at 10 stories, and building 4 is proposed at the back of the site, is proposed at 12 stories. Here it does look like 2 buildings, but you'll see later in our presentation that this is in fact kind of a connection through building 4 to the amenity space you see at the rear of the site. Now, most of the parking is provided underground, with the exception of some convenience parking spaces at the surface level. And there is a proposal for commercial and retail within the ground level of some of the buildings. And you can again see from this site plan that the largest kind of amenity space is contiguous with the ravine. It's up in the corner area here, if you could see my hand marker, as well as we have an amenity space that's kind of a central spine to the site. So gives us the largest space for amenity and also greatest ecological value for that amenity space. So we think it's going to be a great space for our residents to enjoy. Site access is provided at a proposed intersection with D'Ambrosia Drive, and a private driveway is at the north end of the site. So 2 ingress and egress. Oh, sorry, Jerry, I'll leave it for you now for the site plan a little bit, and I'll come back for that final zoning slide.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I mean, Jack touched on a majority of the points, but I think a few of the things that I'd like to mention are that, you know, one of the things that we've tried to do with this concept plan is in looking at how to develop on the site is how to look at what is now, you know, through our discussions with the city, you know, the kind of urban edge of Yonge Street and kind of urbanization of that frontage along Yonge Street. So we envision the street level of building 2 to be the commercial retail, as Jack pointed out, which will have amenities, shops, cafes, and services that are not just for the residents of this development here, but for those that are moving along Yonge Street and within the neighborhood. And so that would be an activated space along the street frontage along Yonge Street, more of that urban edge, as it were. But you will see that we've created this kind of interior court, which is anchored by the green space spine that you'll see. The intent of that is to provide kind of a more inclusive courtyard for the main access points to all of the 4 different building components, so that as you know, we have a more public realm on the Yonge Street side, and it's a more residential realm for the residents that are part of the development within the courtyard space itself. As Jack mentioned, we have access to the south of building 4 with parking ramps that go down to 2 levels of parking. So, you know, the whole idea of and you can grasp this, I think, from the image, that it's not a plethora of parking around there. We're trying to get as much green and kind of green space as we can. Yes, there's lots of roads and access points, but we also do have to provide fire vehicle access and things like that. So, you know, the whole idea was to kind of create this campus setting with the 4 buildings that they relate to one another, relate to the central court. Jack mentioned about the piece to the amenity space, you know, to the east along the ravine. Our studies and analysis show us that it's beneficial to kind of leave that to that side of it. So we've done a physical pedestrian connection through to that space that'll be enjoyed by all the residents. See that as a more passive space. And then with the idea being that the buildings themselves actually come at different scales. As Jack mentioned, 1 and 3 are 8-story buildings. Building 2 in the middle is a 10-story building. And then building 4 is a 12-story building to the rear of the site. And then benefiting from, there's a 2-story fall in terms of grade drop off to the east. So we've tried to look at how these buildings best integrate themselves with the landscape while creating that urban edge and kind of giving a definition, a new definition of an urban edge to Yonge Street. I think that's all I have to add for the site plan for now, Jack, until we get to some of the images.
Great, thank you, Jerry. And I'll let Jerry continue talking with the exception of this one slide. I'll just show you that DEP, the environmental protection areas, will be maintained as they are, as environmental protection areas, and the remainder of the land is we are looking to zone it to a zone more appropriate to its use, such as mixed use corridor MU2 zone.
All right, thanks, Jack. So we've prepared a couple different overview early model renderings. These are by no means the finished version. This is our kind of idea to get a sense of massing, scale, and character of the buildings. This is our overview site plan. So this was also part of an exercise in some shadow studying and looking at what was going on, but you can see how we're trying to lay out the relationship of the buildings. There's the private drive between buildings 1 and 3 to the north. And then, as Jack mentioned, we've aligned the drive to the south with D'Ambrosio, and that's more will work towards the benefit of traffic control and traffic management and flow in and out of the site. And then we've internalized the flow within the site for residents for access within and circulate down to the parking structure. So we're trying to manage all of that work internally. Next slide, Jack. Now, what we've tried to do here is lots of times we will end up moving to elevations, building elevations. They're just flat 2D drawings, and they don't really tell you much about how the building steps and pushes and things like that. And sometimes they're difficult to understand. So this is a quick massing of what this would be like. But as you can see from this, the building on the left is our proposed 8-story building that anchors the north end of the site on Yonge Street. The idea being that whole frontage along Yonge where the sidewalk is will be opened up with our commercial retail pieces, lots of glazing, lots of opening into those commercial retail for kind of a street presence, more of an urban street presence that you would see in cities and become more accustomed to, in other cityscapes throughout the province. What we have done is the first 2 levels are raised up, and then the building steps back from the street somewhat. And then, as I said, it's another 6 stories above that podium base for building 1. And then it goes up to the same height for that. And then it steps back again for the top 2 stories that go to 10 stories for building 2. Building 3, which is in the distance that you could see at the end, is the one that then kind of overlooks the ravine and deals with the rest of the topography falling away. But once again, it's the bookend at the other end that is the smaller scale 8-story piece with the larger 10-story piece that fronts onto Yonge Street in the middle. So this is just to give a sense of not necessarily the final architectural character, but to give a sense of what the overall development intent would be and kind of some of the components that would make it up. Next slide, please, Jack. This is a similar view, but looking the other way. And so that, the bigger difference that you'll see here is that one driveway that is between building 3 and 2 there is the one that lines up directly with D'Ambrosio, as we mentioned. So that's where we see there being the major kind of intersection of traffic through Yonge Street and pedestrian movements and things like that. That we'll deal with through the more detailed process through site plan. And then, as I mentioned, building 3 is the one that also deals with the rest of the fall off into the ravine lands. And so that's where that building will be designed to kind of take advantage of the views and balconies and everything into that kind of green space beyond. So, but once again, at the 8-story scale for that building. Next slide, please, Jack. This one is really just intended to try and show, and I think the viewpoint kind of distorts it maybe a bit, is to give you a sense of what the intent of that green spine in the middle between the buildings would be. And then that's the 12-story building to the back of the site that then, forms the balance of that courtyard that forms part of the overall 4-building campus. Then to the space beyond that becomes the ravine lands and everything else. So just to give you a sense of scale overall. But, even on the earlier slides, it's really because of the way it's scaled in proportion from the street, you'll never really read the height difference from the buildings. It's not very discernible between the 8 to 10, and you definitely won't see the larger, taller building to the back of the site, which takes advantage of the topography and drop off. Next slide, Jack. And then last slide here is just one to try and give a sense of just the 4 building components that are part of the development, and they're, to try and give a sense of proportion and scale with them. So this one probably best helps represent where the relationships are between the 8-story proposed buildings, the 10-story building in the middle that fronts on Yonge Street, and then the taller building, which is to the back of the site, facing onto the ravine lands, with the center court in between them all. But as I said, it's just intended to give a sense of scale, proportion, and understanding of what the development entails. It'll be the idea will be that at 426 units, it'll be a mix of 1-bedroom, and den, and 2-bedroom units, and more of a seniors lifestyle type campus. The idea is to try and make it somewhat self-sufficient, but also inviting. And so, as things evolve, that's the intent of this, but we just wanted to share the thoughts and ideas of how it's developed to date, and go from there. I think that's it for me, Jack.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jerry, for that. So we do think the site's well accommodated to support this type of growth. It's an amalgamation, you see, of several sites, quite large, with a significant frontage on Yonge Street. It has also significant physical kind of distances from other things. To the to the west and to the south of us is the valley lands, the ravine, which separates us, buffers up from other residential uses. Same as to the north, we have large RM2 parcels, and that are very deep as our site essentially. And to our west as well is Yonge Street, which is, as I mentioned, intensification corridor and an arterial in the city of Barrie. So, and the site is intended to be developed to support transit and contribute to intensification targets of both the municipality and the province. And it's close to a number of amenities such as parks and other things and schools. Intensification is being supported on this site through various forms of housing. So the tenure of which will still in flux and still be worked out. And we do intend to use full municipal services and optimize the infrastructure that is there presently and contribute to a safe and vibrant and pedestrian-friendly streetscape. And there's other land uses such as mixed-use nodes, community center, commercial, and general commercial, which are close to the subject site. Now, the Conservation Authority, as well as the City of Barrie, have requested a number of studies and reports for a complete application. The planning justification report will be provided by Innovative Planning Solutions. The functional servicing report, the traffic work, and the topographic survey will be done by Tatham. Our consultant for the tree inventory and landscape plans is Landmark Environmental Group, and we have RWDI for our preliminary wind study, and Cambium is our consultant on geotechnical, hydrogeological, and natural heritage studies. I'll leave you with a few views just to put into perspective some of the distances and the physical distances, and also some of the physical perhaps barriers between our site and the other low-rise residential around us. This is looking south, and in the foreground is that ravine component that you saw on the plans. Looking west, we have again a wide arterial in Yonge Street with this kind of townhouse form across the street from us. Looking north, you see those deep RM2 parcels I was talking about on the other side of the woodlot. And looking east, we have that the ravine feature again, and a significant separation from a lower density residential. So to conclude, we are seeking a zoning bylaw amendment for a mix of uses such as commercial and residential. All the dwelling units are being contained within 4 buildings of varying height between 8 and 12 stories. And as you've seen from the presentation, the majority of the surface parking is underground with the exception of some convenience parking spaces at grade. And we have significant amenity spaces on site as well, the largest of which is contiguous to the ravine feature, and then a large central open space spine on site as well. So thank you very much for your time. Now, Andrew, we will take some questions and answers, and I'll leave up the site plan for our reference.
Great. Thanks for the presentation, Jack. Much appreciated. Before we do move into the public